Every time you swipe a credit card, finance a car, buy something online, or take on another monthly payment, you probably think you're making a personal financial decision. But what if you're not? What if your spending habits are part of something much larger? Something that stretches from your local shopping mall all the way to oil fields in the Middle East, central banks across the world, and the future of the US dollar itself. For decades, America built the most powerful consumer economy in history. But that system only works when people keep buying, borrowing, and spending. The problem is that the world is changing. Global tensions are rising. Energy markets are becoming unstable. Nations are challenging the dominance of the dollar. And if the system begins to crack, millions of Americans may discover that their lifestyle was built on assumptions that are no longer guaranteed. Most people believe America became wealthy because it produces more than everyone else. The reality is more complicated. Modern America runs on consumption. Roughly 70% of US economic activity comes from consumer spending. Every purchase, every subscription, every financed vehicle, every mortgage payment fuels the machine. For decades, policymakers, corporations, advertisers, and lenders all encouraged one behavior above everything else: spend. Spend when you're happy. Spend when you're sad. Spend when you're stressed. Spend because it's a holiday. Spend because there's a sale. Entire industries were built around turning citizens into consumers. This system created extraordinary economic growth, but it also created dependence. If consumers stop spending, businesses slow down. When businesses slow down, jobs disappear. When jobs disappear, spending falls even further. That's why every recession creates panic. America's economy isn't merely supported by consumers, it depends on them. But there's another layer that most people never see. The spending power Americans enjoy isn't just connected to domestic policies. It's deeply connected to the strength of the US dollar. And that connection reaches far beyond American borders. Imagine being able to print pieces of paper and exchange them for real goods from around the world. For decades, the United States enjoyed something close to that advantage because the dollar became the world's dominant reserve currency. Nations needed dollars to trade internationally, particularly for energy. Oil became one of the foundations supporting global demand for dollars. This arrangement helped America borrow more, consume more, and sustain higher levels of spending than would otherwise be possible. But systems built over decades can slowly change. In recent years, several countries have explored alternatives to dollar-based trade. Some energy transactions are increasingly occurring outside traditional dollar channels. At the same time, geopolitical tensions in the Middle East continue creating uncertainty around global energy supplies. Every disruption affects oil prices. Every oil shock affects inflation. And every inflation shock affects consumers. The average American may never think about a tanker crossing the Persian Gulf, but the price of groceries, transportation, and daily necessities can be influenced by events happening thousands of miles away. The uncomfortable truth is that America's consumer lifestyle has always been more connected to global power than most people realize. History shows that geopolitical crises rarely stay contained. Wars, trade conflicts, sanctions, supply disruptions, and energy shortages eventually reach consumers through higher prices. The problem is that many American households are already financially stretched. Credit card balances remain high, housing costs remain elevated, insurance premiums continue rising. Everyday expenses consume larger portions of income than they did for previous generations. This creates a dangerous situation. When global instability pushes prices higher, consumers don't necessarily stop spending. Instead, many borrow more. Credit fills the gap between income and lifestyle. At first, it feels manageable. Then the interest compounds. Slowly, the future gets sold to pay for the present. This is where the consumer trap becomes especially dangerous. People believe they're maintaining their standard of living, when in reality, they're financing it. The economy celebrates spending, regardless of whether it comes from savings or debt. But households eventually face limits. And when enough households hit those limits simultaneously, economic cracks begin to appear. The danger isn't simply inflation. It's a population conditioned to consume in a world becoming increasingly expensive and uncertain. You might assume people would recognize the problem and change course. Yet the system remains remarkably effective. That's because consumerism isn't just economic, it's psychological. Americans are surrounded by messages that equate spending with success. Bigger homes, newer cars, better vacations, premium experiences, luxury upgrades. The promise is always the same. Buy this and you'll feel secure, respected, successful, or happy. Meanwhile, financial media often focuses on short-term consumption rather than long-term ownership. The result is a society where many people spend years increasing their liabilities while believing they're building wealth. The irony is that true financial resilience often looks boring. Lower debt, higher savings, productive assets, emergency reserves, multiple income streams. These things rarely generate headlines or social media attention. Yet they become incredibly valuable when economic conditions change. The consumer trap survives because it feels normal. The people trapped inside it rarely realize they're trapped. And that's exactly why breaking free requires seeing the system for what it is. Not a conspiracy. Not a secret cabal. Simply incentives working exactly as designed. Incentives that encourage spending today and postpone consequences until tomorrow. The consumer economy depends on constant spending, but personal wealth depends on discipline, ownership, and resilience. Global events, energy markets, and the strength of the dollar may influence prices, but your financial future ultimately depends on whether you're building assets or simply funding consumption. The more uncertain the world becomes, the more valuable financial independence becomes. But what if the biggest threat isn't spending? What if the real danger is something even more fundamental? Money itself. For generations, Americans trusted that dollars saved today would hold their value tomorrow. But what if that assumption is no longer true? What if inflation isn't an accident, but a permanent feature of the system? And what happens when people finally realize their savings have been losing purchasing power for decades? Next episode, the inflation illusion, why your money buys less every year. See you in episode 7.